The stars had never seemed so cold and empty as they did to Captain Elena Reyes when she stared out from the bridge of the Exodus 7. Her ship was one of 12 generation vessels that carried what remained of humanity through the endless black void of space. 4 million souls drifted between the stars with nowhere to go and nothing to hope for. Behind them lay Earth, a burned and poisoned world that could no longer support life. Humanity had destroyed its own cradle in a war that lasted 3 terrible years. Now, the survivors floated through space like seeds scattered by a dying flower, praying for soil they might never find. The fusion cores were failing on 6 of the 12 ships. Food supplies had rotted when the preservation systems broke down 2 months ago. Water recyclers worked at half capacity, and the air scrubbers made strange grinding sounds that kept engineers awake at night. Children were being placed into cryogenic sleep pods so that adults could stretch the remaining rations. A little longer, Elena watched a young mother carry her sleeping daughter to the cryo bay, and she felt her heart break into pieces she could not count. This was how humanity would end. She thought not in fire or glory, but in a slow fade into the darkness between stars. The council met every day now. Though there was less and less to discuss, they had sent distress signals in every direction for months, but the galaxy remained silent. The Galactic Concord, that vast alliance of alien civilizations, had received their pleas and responded with bureaucratic indifference. Humanity was not a member species, and therefore not entitled to assistance under Section 47 of the Concord Charter. The great empires had weighed the cost of helping 4 million refugees against the political complications, and had chosen to look away. Elena understood their calculation, even as she hated them for it. Empires did not become powerful by extending kindness to strangers. On the 93rd day of their drift through unclaimed space, the sensors detected a fleet of ships approaching. Elena felt ice form in her stomach as she watched the vessels grow larger on the display screens. The ships were small compared to the war fleets of the great powers, but they outnumbered the defenseless Exodus vessels 3-1. She prepared herself to witness the final chapter of human history. Perhaps raiders had come to pick through the bones of a dying species. Perhaps a hostile empire sought to eliminate potential competition before humanity could recover. The communication officer announced an incoming transmission, and Elena told her to put it through. A face appeared on the main screen that Elena had never seen before. The being had large, luminous eyes that seemed to hold the light of distant stars within them. Its skin was pale blue and almost translucent, revealing delicate patterns of veins beneath the surface. When it spoke, its voice reminded Elena of wind chimes singing in a gentle breeze. "We are the Valeth," the being said, "and we have heard your cries for help across the void." Elena found that words would not come to her throat. The alien continued speaking in that musical voice that seemed too beautiful for the harsh universe they inhabited. "Our worlds are modest and our resources are limited, but we cannot watch children starve when we have food to share. We cannot see families freeze when we have warmth to give. Please, let us help you." Elena finally found her voice and asked what the Veleth wanted in return. The alien tilted its head in a gesture that somehow conveyed confusion and sadness at the same time. "We want nothing," it said, "except perhaps to know that kindness still exists in this galaxy. We were helped once, long ago, when our species faced extinction. We survived because strangers chose to care. Now we pass that gift forward to you." The Veleth opened their worlds to humanity. They shared their food and their medicine and their knowledge of how to live among the stars. They taught humans to build new ships and to farm on alien soil and to breathe air that smelled of flowers humanity had never seen. They asked for nothing but friendship, and they received something far greater in return. The humans called them Anet Kari, which meant those who gave us tomorrow in the old tongue that survivors had carried from Earth. It was a sacred title that no other species would ever earn. 300 years passed and humanity grew strong again. They built cities on a dozen worlds and stations that orbited 100 moons. Their ships traveled the trade lanes of the galaxy, and their merchants became known for fair dealing and honest weights. But they never forgot the debt they owed. Every human child learned the story of the Velith before they learned to read. Every human ship carried a small shrine to honor the species that had saved them from oblivion. And in the hearts of every human being burned a quiet flame of gratitude that time could not extinguish. The great empires of the Galactic Concord watched humanity with growing unease as the centuries rolled past. These humans were strange creatures who did not behave as proper civilizations should. They did not scheme for advantage or plot the downfall of rivals. They did not seek to expand their territory through conquest or intimidation. Instead, they built their civilization beside the Velith, treating the smaller species as honored elders rather than useful tools. The Concord strategists could not understand this behavior, and what they could not understand they feared. A species that remembered kindness for 300 years might also remember cruelty for just as long. And no one in the galaxy had been kind to humanity except a Velith in the shadowed halls of 100 capitals. Powerful beings began to wonder what humanity might do if someone threatened their beloved saviors. They would learn the answer soon enough, and the lesson would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The dominion of the Kreth had ruled their sector of space for 10,000 years without interruption. They were an ancient species with hard shells, covering their bodies and eyes that gleamed like black stones in firelight. Their empire stretched across 300 worlds, and their war fleets numbered in the tens of thousands. They had conquered 62 species in their long history and had never once tasted defeat. The Kreth did not believe in kindness or mercy or any of the soft emotions that weaker species clung to for comfort. They believed in power and the natural right of the strong to take from the weak. This philosophy had served them well through 100 centuries of expansion. When Kreth strategists looked at their star maps and saw the 11 worlds of the Velith, they saw only opportunity. The Velith territories contained rare minerals essential for advanced technology. Their position along major trade routes made them strategically valuable, and the Velith themselves were weak and defenseless. With no military to speak of and no allies willing to fight for them, the humans were a concern, but only a minor one. Intelligence reports indicated that humanity possessed a modest defense fleet suitable for border patrols and pirate suppression. They had no history of warfare against other species and had shown no aggressive tendencies in 3 centuries of galactic contact. Kreth High Command calculated that the humans would protest through diplomatic channels and then accept the inevitable. This was how civilized species behaved when faced with superior force. The invasion fleet departed on the first day of the Kreth sacred month. 3,000 warships crossed into Velith space with weapons armed and soldiers ready. The Velith detected them coming, but could do nothing to stop what followed. Their ships were cargo haulers and passenger liners designed for peaceful commerce, not war. Their people were scientists and artists and teachers who had never held weapons in their delicate hands. They broadcast desperate pleas for help to every species that might listen, but the galaxy remained silent. The Galactic Concord issued statements expressing deep concern and calling for restraint from all parties. These words meant nothing to the Kreth commanders, who continued their advance without pause. The conquest took 6 hours from start to finish. Velith cities burned under orbital bombardment to turn ancient libraries to ash and beautiful gardens to smoking crater. Civilians were herded into camps where Kreth soldiers sorted them for labor assignments. Those too old or too young or too sick to work were classified as surplus population. The screams of the Velith echoed across space on open communication channels that anyone could hear. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez was attending a trade summit on the Concord capital world when the invasion began. She received the first reports during a reception hosted by the Commerce Council. A junior aide handed her a datapad with trembling hands, and she read the words 3 times before they made sense. The Velith homeworld had fallen. Casualties were estimated in the millions. The provisional government had surrendered to prevent further slaughter. Yelan stood perfectly still in the middle of that glittering ballroom, surrounded by diplomats who laughed and drank. As if nothing had happened, she watched the footage on her datapad, showing Velith children crying in the rubble of their homes. She saw Kreth soldiers marching through streets that humans had helped build with their own hands. She heard the voice of an elderly Velith leader begging for someone to save his people. Before the transmission cut to static, the Kreth ambassador approached her with a glass of wine in one hand and a smile on his face that showed too many teeth. His name was Thok, and he had served his dominion for 200 years in various diplomatic posts. He was known for his charm and his cruelty in equal measure. "A shame about your little friends," Thok said in a voice that dripped with false sympathy. "But surely you understand how these things work. The strong take what they desire, and the weak accept what they must. This is the natural order of the galaxy, and it has been so since before your species learned to make fire." Yelan looked at him with eyes that had gone cold and flat like frozen lakes in winter. She said nothing for a long moment while the noise of the party swirled around them. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "You misunderstand something fundamental, Ambassador. The Velith are not our friends. They are not our allies or our trading partners, or any of the convenient labels that civilizations use to describe relationships of mutual benefit. The Velith are our family. They are the ones who fed us when we starved. They are the ones who sheltered us when we had no home. They are the ones who looked at 4 million dying humans and saw something worth saving. And you just made a mistake that your species will not survive." Thok laughed at her words because he had heard threats from 100 species over his long career. None of them had ever followed through when faced with Kreth power, but something in the human ambassador's eyes made his laughter die in his throat. She turned and walked out of the reception without looking back. Within an hour, every human diplomat in Concord space had departed their posts. Within a day, human merchant ships began withdrawing from galactic trade routes. Within a week, all communication from human space simply stopped. The Kreth High Command reviewed these developments and concluded that the humans were sulking. They would return to normal behavior once they accepted the new reality. This assessment would prove to be the greatest miscalculation in the long history of the Kreth Dominion. The silence from human space grew deeper with each passing week, and the galaxy began to notice trade. Representatives who had done business with humanity for generations found their calls. Unanswered diplomatic missions sent to human worlds were turned away at the border by patrol ships that refused to explain why scientists waiting for human colleagues to arrive at joint research stations waited in vain. It was as if an entire civilization had simply decided to stop talking to the rest of the universe. The Galactic Concord dispatched observers to investigate this unusual behavior. 3 ships crossed into human territory and were politely but firmly escorted back to the border. 2 more attempted to slip through undetected and were never heard from again. A 6th vessel, crewed by the most experienced intelligence operatives the Concord possessed, managed to reach a human colony world before going silent. The last transmission from that ship contained only 4 words, spoken in a voice that trembled with something between terror and awe. "They are building something." The Kreth Dominion was less concerned than the rest of the galaxy. Their analysts had studied humanity for decades and knew them to be a peaceful species focused on commerce and cultural exchange. Whatever the humans were building was probably some kind of memorial to their fallen Velith friends, a grand gesture of mourning that would satisfy their emotional needs. without changing anything real. Kreth intelligence did manage to intercept fragments of communication from within human space. These fragments were disturbing in ways that the analysts struggled to explain. Factories that had produced consumer goods for centuries were being converted to unknown purposes. Shipyards that had built cargo vessels were now surrounded by security so tight that even satellite surveillance could not penetrate. Mining operations had increased their output by 300% with no explanation of where the raw materials were going. And everywhere in human space, the same phrase kept appearing in coded transmissions. Wake the sleepers. No one in Kreth. Intelligence knew what this phrase meant, but it appeared so often that it had to be significant. Some analysts theorized it referred to veterans of ancient human conflicts being called back to service. Others suggested it might be a code name for some kind of weapon system. Few of the more imaginative analysts proposed that humanity had been hiding military capabilities. For 3 centuries, these last analysts were laughed at by their colleagues and reassigned to less important duties. Everyone knew that no species could hide significant military power from the intelligence services of the great empires. The technology required for such deception simply did not exist. 3 months after the fall of the Velith homeworld, human space transmitted a single message on all frequencies. The message was received by every ship and station and planet in the galaxy simultaneously. It contained no words and no images. It was simply a countdown, numbers ticking away toward 0. In the standard galactic time format, the countdown would reach its end in exactly 30 days. The Galactic Concord demanded an explanation, but received only silence. The Kreth High Command convened an emergency session to discuss this development. Most of the senior commanders viewed the countdown as psychological warfare, designed to create fear and uncertainty. Humans were known to be emotional creatures who might engage in such dramatic gestures to express their distress. The countdown would reach 0 and nothing would happen, and the galaxy would move on. One voice dissented from this comfortable consensus. His name was Karthuk, and he was the oldest serving officer in the Kreth military. His shell was scarred from a dozen campaigns, and his eyes had seen more death than most beings could imagine. When he spoke, the other commanders fell silent out of respect for his experience. "I have studied the humans," Karthuk said in his rasping voice. "Not the humans of today, but the humans of their homeworld before they fled into space. I have read their histories and examined their wars and analyzed their patterns of behavior. What I found disturbed me greatly." He activated a display showing images from ancient human conflicts. Cities reduced to rubble stretched across the screen. Weapons that could crack the crust of a planet and poison the air for generations. Soldiers marching in numbers that defied comprehension, and everywhere death on a scale that even the Kreth found impressive. These creatures nearly destroyed their entire world because they could not stop fighting each other. Karthuk continued. They did not flee Earth because they lost the war. They fled because they won. They won so completely that there was nothing left worth having. And then they drifted through space for 3 years watching their children starve. That experience changed them, but it did not make them weak. It made them patient. The other commanders shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Karthuk was not finished. For 300 years, humanity has been peaceful. They have traded and explored and built their civilization without conflict. But ask yourselves this question. Did they become peaceful because they forgot how to fight? Or did they become peaceful because they no longer had anyone worth fighting? The Velith gave them a reason to live instead of die, and we have just given them a reason to remember what they truly are. The High Command dismissed Karthuk's concerns as the fears of an old soldier who had fought too many battles. They reinforced their border fortresses and continued their occupation of Velith space. They watched the countdown tick toward 0 and waited to see what kind of empty gesture the humans would make. The countdown reached 0 at exactly midnight Galactic Standard Time, and the darkness between stars began to move. The fortress of Axiom Prime had guarded the border of Kreth space for 3,000 years. It was the most heavily defended installation in the entire Dominion. 12 battle stations orbited the central command platform like moons around a planet of steel and fire. 200 capital ships patrolled the surrounding space in patterns designed to detect any approaching threat weapons. Batteries capable of cracking asteroids pointed outward in every direction. The garrison numbered 500,000 soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a battle that had never come. No enemy had ever been foolish enough to attack Axiom Prime Commander. Vreth stood on the observation deck and watched his sensors with growing confusion. Something was approaching from human space, but his instruments could not identify what it was. The readings made no sense. Ships appeared and disappeared from his screens as if they were ghosts slipping between dimensions. Their power signatures fluctuated wildly between readings. That should have been impossible, and they were moving faster than any vessel the Kreth had ever encountered. How many ships? Vreth demanded of his sensor officer. The officer's voice trembled as he answered. Approximately 60 vessels. Commander. But sir, you need to see these readings. Vreth examined the data on his personal display and felt his blood turn cold. Approaching ships were not the modest patrol craft that existed in galactic databases under the human classification. These were something else entirely. Their hulls were black as the void itself, and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They bristled with weapon systems that Kreth technology could not even categorize, and they moved through space with an agility that should have killed their crews from the acceleration forces alone. All stations to battle readiness. Vreth commanded, launch all fighters and prepare for defensive engagement. The Kreth fleet responded with the precision of 10,000 years of military tradition. Ships moved into formation with engines blazing, weapons charged and locked onto the approaching targets. Fighter craft poured from launch bays like angry insects defending their hive. 200 ships against 60. The math favored the Kreth by a significant margin. The battle began when the first Kreth vessel opened fire. It ended 11 minutes later. Vreth watched from his command platform as his entire fleet was systematically destroyed. The human ships did not fight like any enemy the Kreth had ever faced. They did not advance in formation or exchange broadsides in the traditional manner of space combat. They danced. They wove between Kreth vessels with impossible grace, striking from angles that should not have existed. Their weapons cut through Kreth shields as if they were made of paper beams of light that burned white-hot, sliced through armor plating without slowing. Missiles that moved faster than sensors could track found their targets with perfect accuracy. And, through it all, the human ships took not a single hit. Every shot the Kreth fired missed by meters, or was intercepted by defensive systems that reacted faster than thought fighters launched against. The human fleet simply vanished from existence, erased by weapons that left no debris behind. Capital ships that had served the Dominion for centuries were reduced to drifting hulks in seconds. But the humans were not trying to kill. Vreth realized this as he watched the pattern of destruction unfold. Before him, they were targeting engines and weapons and shield generators. They were leaving crews alive in disabled ships. They wanted the Kreth to witness their own helplessness. They wanted survivors to carry word of what had happened here when the offended last Kreth vessel went dark. The human fleet stopped firing. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The face that appeared on screen belonged to a human female with gray hair and eyes that held no mercy. Her uniform bore the insignia of an admiral, and her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I am Admiral Chun of the Human Defense Force. She said, we are coming for our family. Every Veleth held in your camps will be released. Every Veleth world will be liberated. Every Kreth soldier who has harmed a Veleth civilian will answer for their crimes. Anyone who stands in our way will be removed. This is not a war. This is a debt being paid. The transmission ended, and the human fleet moved past Axiom Prime without pausing. They did not bother to destroy the fortress. It was no longer relevant. Vreth stood alone on his observation deck, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had believed about the galaxy. The Kreth had ruled through strength for 10,000 years. They had believed that power was the only truth that mattered. Now they understood that they had never truly known what power meant. The human fleet broadcast Admiral Chum's message on every frequency as it advanced into Kreth space. That message was received by 100 species across the galaxy, and the halls of the Galactic Concord ambassadors watched the footage from Axiom Prime and struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The footage from Axiom Prime and struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The Sid, modest humans who had traded peacefully for 3 centuries, had become something terrifying. They had hidden their true capabilities for 10 generations. They had smiled and bargained and played the role of a minor power while building weapons that could crack empires. And they had done all of this because of a debt of kindness owed to a species that had saved them from extinction. The great powers of the galaxy felt something unfamiliar spreading through their populations. It was fear, pure and absolute, not of human cruelty or human ambition, but of human loyalty. Because if humanity would do this for the Velith, what would they do to those who had turned away when humans were dying in the void 3 centuries ago? The question had no answer, and that made it all the more terrifying. The liberation of the Velith worlds took 14 days from start to finish. The Kreth Dominion, which had stood undefeated for 10,000 years, collapsed in 3 months. It was not because humanity destroyed them, though they possessed the power to do so. It was because the human fleet made an example so complete and so terrifying that resistance seemed pointless. Kreth commanders, who ordered their ships to fight, watched those ships become drifting wreckage in minutes. Kreth garrisons that refused to surrender found themselves cut off from supply lines and communication. World after world fell not to invasion, but to the simple mathematics of facing an enemy that could not be stopped. The occupation forces on Velith planets received a single warning before the human ships arrived. They could release their prisoners and withdraw peacefully, or they could die where they stood. Most chose to live. Those who did not became lessons for others. The humans did not engage in revenge, though they had earned the right to do so. They did not bomb Kreth cities or slaughter Kreth civilians. They did not repay cruelty with cruelty or answer blood with blood. Instead, they hunted down every officer who had ordered atrocities against the Velith. These individuals were captured alive and brought before tribunals where their crimes were documented in precise detail. Evidence was presented. Witnesses testified, and judgments were rendered according to laws that humanity had written specifically for this purpose. The guilty were not executed. Death would have been too quick and too merciful. Instead, they were exiled to barren moons. At the edge of known space, they were given just enough supplies to survive if they worked hard and planned carefully. They were left alone with their memories and their guilt and the knowledge that the galaxy would never forget what they had done. This punishment disturbed the great powers of the Galactic Concord more than any massacre would have. The Kreth had expected human rage and human vengeance and human savagery. They could have understood those things because they had done the same to conquered peoples for centuries. But this cold and methodical justice was something else entirely. It suggested a patience and a purpose that went beyond simple revenge. It suggested that humanity remembered everything and forgave nothing. Velith returned to their worlds and found human ships guarding their skies. Human engineers helped rebuild the cities that Kreth weapons had destroyed. Human doctors treated survivors in hospitals, constructed from materials that human cargo vessels had carried across the stars. Human soldiers stood watch at every crossroads and every border, their eyes scanning for any threat to the people they had sworn to protect. Velith Elder, who had begged for salvation in those desperate first hours of the invasion, met with Admiral Chun on the steps of the rebuilt Capitol building. His name was Telek, and he had lost 3 children to the Kreth occupation. He looked at the human admiral with those luminous eyes that had once seemed so fragile and asked why. Why had humanity paid such a terrible price for a species that could offer nothing in return? Why had they revealed capabilities they had hidden for 3 centuries? Why had they risked everything for a people they owed nothing, Admiral? Chun smiled at him with a warmth that seemed impossible from someone who had just broken an empire. 300 years ago, my ancestors were dying in the dark between stars. She said, your people found them and fed them and gave them hope when there was none. You did not ask what you would receive in return. You did not calculate the costs and benefits. You simply saw suffering and chose to end it. Today, we have done the same for you. This is not payment of a debt. This is family taking care of family, and it will never end as long as humans draw breath. The galaxy watched these events unfold with a mixture of awe and terror. Ambassadors from 100 species came to human space with offers of alliance and partnership. They had seen what humanity could do, and they wanted that power on their side. Ambassador Vasquez received them in a hall filled with images of the Velith rescue. She listened to their proposals with a patient expression that revealed nothing of her thoughts. When they had finished speaking, she thanked them for their interest and declined every offer. We do not want your alliances, she told them. We do not want your fear or your flattery or your calculations of mutual benefit. We want you to understand one simple truth. Humanity remembers. We remember everyone who helped us when we were weak and desperate and dying. We remember everyone who looked away and did nothing. We remember every kindness and every cruelty across the centuries. The Velith saved us when they had nothing to gain from doing so. That is why we would burn the galaxy to ashes before we let harm come to them again. So ask yourselves this question. When your species was young and struggling and in need of help, who showed you kindness? And what would you do to protect them? The ambassadors had no answer because they had never thought in such terms. Power and advantage and strategic positioning were the languages they understood. Loyalty and gratitude and love were foreign concepts that did not appear in their political calculations. But in the centuries that followed, something strange began to happen across the galaxy. Species started reaching out to each other not for advantage, but for connection. Old debts of kindness were remembered and repaid. Small acts of generosity between strangers became more common. Alliances formed based on friendship rather than fear. It was as if humanity had reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten. That the universe did not have to be cold and cruel. That power did not have to mean domination. That kindness could be strength and loyalty could be terrifying on the restored Velith homeworld. In a garden that humans and Velith had planted together, a monument stood at the center. It was a simple pillar of white stone carved with words in both languages. The inscription read the same in human script and Velith flowing characters. To those who gave us tomorrow, we give you forever. Ships still trembled. When human fleets passed through the space lanes, empires still feared the species that had broken the Kreth in 3 months. But now they understood the truth that the Kreth had learned too late. Humanity was not terrifying because of their weapons or their hidden strength. Humanity was terrifying because of their love. And in a galaxy that forgotten what love meant, that made them the most dangerous species of all. The stars no longer seemed cold to those who had earned human friendship, but to those who had shown cruelty to the innocent. The darkness between stars held nightmares that would never end.